In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast, it is part two of a two-part series where me, my brother James, and Leif Thulin, where we shared our thoughts on the opening weekend of the 2025 NCAA Tournament. And we had game winners, we had some games that went down to the wire, we had some prospects shine, we had some struggle. So in this episode, we are going to share our thoughts from the opening weekend of the 2025 NCAA Tournament. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast your first, or maybe in this case, your second listen of the day. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe, along with my brother James and Leif Thulin. And before we get into this episode, I want to let you know that it is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control over your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And also, if you are not subscribed to the Locked On NBA Big Boy YouTube channel, please subscribe, like, share, comment, click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode. And your favorite NBA team has the newsletter delivered right to your inbox. Check it out at lockedondaily.com. It is your one stop for ultimate team and league coverage. Again, delivered right to your inbox every single day. All right, here is part two. So we share our thoughts and our observations from the opening weekend of the 2025 NCAA Tournament. All right, let's switch over to Kasparas Jakucionis. Now, he has been a player that I've been saying for the last, 3 months, that he's a very difficult eval for me. At one point, I was like, okay, you know what? I see the concerns and the red flags, but the production, I'm just going to have to overlook it. As the season went on, it was like, whoa, those red flags are glaring, and they're more glaring. And over the past few weeks, I mean, everything that I was concerned about has been magnified. And in the two NCAA tournament games, he's blown up. And the Kentucky game, I felt like he really, really struggled. He had 13 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. He was 5 of 13 from the floor, 2 of 9 from 3, but he had 6 turnovers. And the prior game against Xavier, he had 6 turnovers, and he was 3 of 11 from the floor, 1 of 6 from 3. So when I look at like just the two NCAA tournament games, 7.5 of his 12 attempts were threes, and he was just 20% from 3. But he averaged 6 turnovers a game. Matter of fact, he's had 6 turnovers in his last 4 games, and it is becoming more and more obvious that he's going to struggle turning the corner, that the athleticism is going to possibly be an issue. Like, he's not going to be able to get in the paint in the NBA unless he has a screen. And to me, if passing is the skill set that people are raving about, I think that you need to be a downhill threat to maximize your passing. But then I feel like he kind of eliminates the passing because he's so turnover prone. I want to say there's like 10 or 11 games this year where he's had more turnovers than field goals made. And like I said, the last 4 games, 6 turnovers. What are your thoughts on how the last maybe month or so of the season has impacted his draft range? Because I don't even know if he's a lottery pick now. Yes, he's 6'6", but I can name some guards that went high because they were tall. And whether it's, I don't want to bang on the French guys, but I mean, Frank Ntilikina.
Dante Exum, not French, but he was a tall point guard.
Killian Hayes. I mean, Giddey has worked out, but
I don't want to say it's not a I told you so moment because it's early still, But even when he was being super efficient, I was like, he couldn't really beat guys off the bounce. And the turnovers have been there all year. Like, that's been an issue for him. But now that he's not making the 3 ball like you want him to, or at least not at that unsustainable level, I mean, my last mock that I had put out, I believe, at the end of the figure, I had him at 11. So I'm not like reacting to the loss today or the last 4 or 5 games. Really, like, I've been kind of cool on him from the jump. And I say, like I said to you, Raf, he reminds me of Lonzo. Like, in the half court, or in the full court, good passer. But I just don't see I never saw the franchise point guard level talent that comes with, to me, being a top 5 pick. Just because he can't beat anybody off the dribble. The athleticism, well, he's not very athletic, but also if he is 6'6", like what does he do to be 6'6" to like use it as an advantage? Because he doesn't post anybody up. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, oh, he's 6'6" and that's why he does X, Y, Z better. I could say
the rebounding. I mean, he's an excellent rebounder.
Yeah, but
I mean, he rebounds in traffic. Like he goes and gets rebounds.
But you don't necessarily have to be 6'6" to be a great rebounder. I mean, like, you know, who is? But Steph Curry at 6'3" can't jump over a sheet of paper. When it comes down to it, he can get you 4 rebounds a game as well. So I get that point of it. But I just feel like he's going to be, and I've always felt like this, he's going to be a complimentary guard because of his limitations as far as creating shots. Again, I do think he will be a better shooter. I think some of the shots that he has to take right now, or that he is taking, he won't necessarily have to because he'll be paired with better players, ideally a better wing. So you'll see him making and taking more catch and shoot jumpers. But he like VJ doesn't strike fear in me because the handle is good. It's not great. I almost think the passing is just good and not great because, again, a lot of the turnovers that he has, he is, you know, whether it's athleticism or the handle, but like he gets caught up in the air. And as a guy who, I mean, you know, jumping in the air to make passes is fine, but he jumps in the air and it's not because the defense collapsed. Like he jumps in the air because he runs out of like turbo to even make a play. So with that being said, I've had him outside of my top 10 for about a month now. And again, top 13 pick. I mean, to be honest with you, Ralph, shoot, I can make the argument that I might even take Yegor with no jump shot over Jakucionis just because I feel like he actually uses those advantages, the height, and he is actually a really good passer. I could entertain it. I'm still kind of on the fence on that. So
Jakucionis, like to touch on Yegor versus Jakucionis, Jakucionis has more guile to him. Like when he goes downhill, yeah, he doesn't terrify me as a downhill driver, but he can jump stop. He can get you some head fakes, draw fouls. Like we talk a lot about good scorers draw fouls. Like he's able to do that. Egor Demin
he wants no action at all.
He's petrified by pressure. Like as soon as someone gets up in him, like Houston, he's had terrible, terrible games. And I know Houston's an anomalous defense in college basketball, but you look at like the NBA, there's a rep on players. Some players you just pick up full court and they pass it away and you take them out of a game. Like he's going to have that. Drew Holiday is going to be the worst nightmare in the world for Egor Demin. Yegor is the best passer in this draft. Like the way he sees the floor is unbelievable, but he's inept at going downhill and scoring despite having that frame. Like when he scores, it's because someone's picked off completely or he's attacking a closeout with a pump fake. And his shots actually been better of late when BYU's been thriving, but like there's more spacing. Their players are knocking down open shots and there's more and more space for him to go downhill and create and look as best as he can. Credit to him. I'm not holding that against him. But Jakucionis' team is 300th in the entire NCAA at making threes. I think that makes his job a little more difficult, and he's a more gifted scorer than Egor Demin. Like he's in a different class as a shooter and a scorer than Demin, just like Demin, I think, is in a tier all to himself as a better passer. I think Jakucionis uses his height more than Yegor does in terms of, one, rebounding, and two, using his body to score. Egor Demin's very upright and stiff. He just sees over people. And I don't know if it's necessarily his height or just he's just got better vision in general, because I don't know if it's those extra 2 inches that he's 6'8" and Jakucionis is 6'6" that enables him to be a better passer.
I think he does have better vision. Like even like the play, I believe that was yesterday, where he drew 2, he got into the paint, he threw the behind the back pass at the top of the key. Like that play there, he makes skip passes. Even just like, I know they were playing like Cal Riverside and God knows who else, but like he threw a lob off the glass. Mm-hmm. Like you could tell, like stuff like that Yegor does. But ultimately, though, since we're talking about Yegor, I don't think he's a point guard at the next level. I think he's like Joe Ingles, where he's your small forward that can run some offense. Because like you said, you put a smaller guy on him and he's not you want to talk about east to west, Ralph. He's just going sideline to sideline because he can't beat anybody. But at the same time, like if he is your third playmaker, you know what I'm saying, and pick and roll and he becomes a respectable shooter, I think he's a really, really gifted passer. But I've said from the jump, I don't think Yegor is going to play point guard at the next level just because his handle isn't tight and he's a three-point line guy.
Have you ever checked your bank account and you wondered where in the world did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is very easy to lose track. And that is where Monarch Money comes in. Monarch Money can be your personal CFO, which gives you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, spending in one place. So you can stop just managing your money and you can start building wealth. So instead of juggling through multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, to track your spending, and even plan your long-term goals. And managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track your shared accounts. You can set goals and you can stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. I actually feel like coming into the NCAA tournament that he needed some strong performances to stay in the 2025 NBA draft. I felt like if he would have had, Yegor. If he would have had some down performances, then the chatter of him returning to Provo would have been even louder, especially if you think about if Richie Saunders comes back, the team they could possibly have next year.
Richie's really good.
He is very, very good. We'll talk about him in a second. But with Yegor, I thought that he caught me by surprise in the VCU matchup. And we talked about it. I thought, oh, man, that's a tough matchup for him. Max Shulgis, that fifth-year guard, that's scrappy. Didn't think that they were going to spend a lot of time on each other, but I just thought that was a recipe for disaster for Yegor, considering that he was coming off a 2-for-9 game against Houston, but he played well. Like, he played with the confidence that I hadn't seen since prior to Thanksgiving. He made threes. He was taking threes. He actually took 11 shots. And in the two NCAA tournament games, the games against VCU and Wisconsin, he's taken 21 shots total, which is, I mean, you want that because he's had games where he had like Iowa State 4 shots, Arizona State 6 shots. Like, he had a bunch of games where it was just not even double-digit shots. And I'll say it again, I think if you're a really gifted passer, you enhance your passing when you are a threat to score. So I thought Yegor has at least maintained his draft stock with his performance over the last 2 games.
I think he's a top 20 pick. Like 6'8", 6'9", very, very good passer. And if he can just pass, which he does extremely well now, and turn into a catch and shoot guy, like, that's a good career. Now, do I ever think if he'll ever get that mindset to just be aggressive and turn the corner? I mean, like, he needs like Leif said, he needs a clear runway and a Gortat screen to get to the basket. But I don't know if he'll ever get that in his game, but if he's just respectable off the catch with his passing ability, I think even when he was shooting like trash, which was a good chunk of the season, I still thought he was just a top 20 pick just because, like I mentioned with Fears, like, there's just certain things guys do you just can't teach. And, like, he is, to me, the best passer in this draft by, like, a pretty wide margin.
All right, let's talk about his teammate. I know he's not on the rundown, Richie Saunders. He's a guy that, you know what, you just have to chalk it up and say, this dude is good. Like, I don't know if he's an NBA player, but he's definitely in the range. Well, I should say this. I don't know if he's going to stick, but he's going to get some shots in the NBA just because of his shooting. I mean, he shot 43% this year, and he's a gamer. I mean, 25 points against Wisconsin. I think he's continuing to prove that he is a player that you know, is a potential At least I think he's a two-way guy for sure. But I do think that he's got the potential to be in the NBA. What are your thoughts on that, Leif?
Yeah, I talked to people who are on the BYU staff or were there, and tons of fans here in Utah are BYU fans. You talk to them, and Richie's the best player on this team by a long shot. Like Yegor is the best prospect, but Richie stands out every single night. He plays good defense. He slashes. He shoots a very, very good percentage from deep. He shoots well from the free throw line. He's able to play composed, better athlete than he's given credit for. And he's the type of guy that you need on a team to win. You need guys that can knock down open shots when they're called upon, don't mind doing the dirty work, go get rebounds, fight over screens. Like he does everything that a coach wants at an exceedingly high level. And then he's their best player. Like you don't typically see people play as hard as he does that shoot as well as he does. And actually, in fact, I said that without thinking about it, but I'm pretty sure that's an exact quote from their coach, Kevin Young. Like they were talking about this in the Big 12 tournament against Iowa State. And he's at the free throw line and he's sweating. And they say, Kevin Young talks about Richie Saunders and say, usually people that go as hard as he does are bad shooters. And here he is, 13 of 13 at the free throw line. Like that was the context. And every game it's true. So I'm a believer that he could be a second round pick and will make the NBA. I also think it's likely he comes back for another year at BYU because they got boatloads of money and a really talented roster and a coach that is certainly trending in the right direction. So that could be also very fun.
Go ahead, Ralph.
Do you think if they beat Alabama and he has another big game, do you think that they could possibly lose Yegor and Richie?
Oh, yeah, very possible. And I don't think that's crazy. I think BYU can beat Alabama because they can put up points. And Alabama, they can put up points as well, and they play fast, but they don't shoot it as well as BYU does. So Alabama's going to have to dominate the glass, and they very well might, and I still think Alabama deserves to be the favorite, but I don't think this is as much of a mismatch as people may perceive it to be.
I was going to say, but if Richie comes back next year, he'll be 24. Like he's got the BYU red shirt package where they do a couple years because of a mission. So I know he's a junior on paper, but he's 23 now. So if he comes back to school, 24-year-olds likely don't get drafted, but that doesn't mean he doesn't get an opportunity to play in the NBA. It's just it'd be interesting. And isn't he the Tater Tot kid too?
Yep.
So what's the point? I mean, money's not a thing for him, obviously, but it'd be interesting to see what happens. I feel like, if they do beat Alabama and he continues to play well, and you got to test because, you shoot the ball well and you play hard and you defend, you got to roll those dice to see if you can get drafted.
All right, let's switch over to Liam McNeeley. I know Leif did a podcast about Liam early, I don't know, maybe about a month or so ago. And Liam had 22 points, 3 assists, 2 rebounds in a close 75 to, well, they lost 77-75 to number 1 seed Florida. They actually surprised me. But then again, Danny Hurley's a really good coach, so I shouldn't be too surprised. I mean, a team that had won 13 straight tournament games, but the game was closer than I thought. On paper, McNeeley was solid, 22 points, 6 of 16 from the floor. But this was a game where the eye test and the box score to me were just on 2 totally different pages. What are your thoughts on that, Leif?
Yeah, I thought he was not very good in this game. And I also think at the end of the Big East tournament, he wasn't particularly good against UConn. For UConn against Creighton. But essentially, I thought in this game, the athletes of Florida overwhelmed him. He was able to get shots because they were running unbelievable sets that drained shot clock. They do these split cuts off of a pin down. It was a masterpiece. And he and Alex Karaman got a lot of open shots and didn't knock many down. So, yeah, you miss some shots that doesn't reflect very well. And then what I had been liking about him is he was able to attack closeouts and create for others as well as for himself. And in this game, when he would attack a closeout, he looked unsure of himself. He looked like he was trying to draw contact and shoot free throws as opposed to trying to score or trying to make the natural instinctive play of, whether it's a dump off or a kick out. It looked like he was sped up and didn't quite have the athleticism to turn into, hey, if they're trying to speed me up, I'm going to make them pay by getting to the rim. kind of indecisive and staying put in the intermediate part of the court. So I was a little disappointed in this game. I thought defensively he looked less than optimal, but I also do think he's asked to do too much at UConn, and that you didn't expect someone to have to be the lead creator for a team as a freshman on a team that just won the national championship and was top 3 in the country coming into the season. So I do think there's some grains of salt to be taken with that, but I was a little disappointed. My stock's down on him, but I still think he's probably a lottery pick just because he's steady. And though the numbers don't say he's an amazing shooter, I think he's a very good shooter, and he's a rugged player, tough guy. He's going to get rebounds. I still think he can end up somewhat like a Bojan Bogdanovic.
Liam McNeeley. I like that he rebounds. I like that he plays hard. I like that he competes. I think he's a good passer in the sense that he's unselfish and he'll make the right play. But he's shooting 43%, he's shooting 43% off the catch, which is good. And ideally, like Lee said, his role at UConn is probably highly likely not his role in the NBA. But he's shooting 43% at the rim also. And it's like, okay, in the NBA, once they chase you off the line, what do you do? And I think that his lack of athleticism is concerning. I think he's ultimately a 4 in the NBA, but I really don't like the way his feet move, not even on offense. I think he's just kind of like clunky, but especially on defense, I think he's going to struggle to defend in space because that floor obviously gets a lot bigger in the NBA. But again, competing, like I said, I do like the shooting when he's making shots, obviously, but I do think he will be a better shooter. But I am kind of like lower on him now just because he just hasn't been productive. And whether or not, that's not his role, but like we've seen guys who we can sit here and say, all right, yeah, he may not play that way at the next level, but he's still efficient. You know what I'm saying? And he just has not been efficient at all. And I mean, he's not responsible for it, but going into the season, he was a top 10 player in the country. And I believe he was last time I saw, and this is before the game today, he was shooting like 39% from the field, 33% from 3 overall. So I think he's a top 20, top 25 pick, but I do think he does have like some glaring limitations. And ultimately, he's going to stand in the corner and it's going to come down to him making shots. But he is going to compete, which is always a plus sign.
Yeah, he's an interesting one for me. I mean, he had the 38-point game against Creighton where he just absolutely went crazy. But since then, it's kind of been a struggle. And when I look at like his performances against like ranked opponents, it just kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit. Like, all right, where do I put him? Yes, I agree 100% that the role he's playing now would not be his role in the NBA. He's not going to be the top dog on a team. He may be like the 5th option on the team. And I do think that he's going to look better in the role. The shooting just he's had some really, really difficult shooting nights. Like even in the first round, 2 for 13 against Oklahoma. He was 6 of 20 in the last game against Creighton. Then he had a 1 of 6 game against Seton Hall. He had a 4 of 18 game against Marquette. He had an 0 for 9 game against Dayton, 2 for 13 against St. John's. He's had some rough shooting nights. And so I will say this, the shooting has not lived up to what I thought it would be coming into the season. I think he's a better shooter than the numbers indicate, especially if he's wide open. But even when I look at this game against Florida, he had some really good looks. And I don't know if there's an NBA coach that's going to run better sets than what Danny Hurley runs. And the shooting is concerning. And to me, if he's not going to be like a lights out shooter, then what? Because if he's a lights out shooter, then it's going to open up the connective passing and all of that. But if he's not, with the potential like defensive issues, then it just gives me some concerns.
He's definitely going to be somebody at the next level that they go throw their point guard on. Like Trae Young, go guard Liam McNeeley because, chase him off the line, make him do something else. he's not. Yeah, he's just gonna be that guy on at the next level, which is fine. You can take advantage of it, but yeah, it's been like a disappointing season for him. I know he got hurt. He did have the ankle injury, I believe, but it's been a disappointing season. But somebody will. Again, he's 6'7", 6'8", and he plays hard. Somebody will take a nice long look at him, but I thought he would be a more efficient shooter, even with the role, but it is what it is.
I think he's rugged, though. Like, the thing about him that I think is plug and play is physically he'll be able to compete. So many of these guys that we estimate, like they'll be able to figure it out because they're athletic and they're coordinated and, in time they'll be a good defender. And many of those guys, like firsthand Cody Williams has been a disappointment for the Jazz, who fits those parameters. Like Liam McNeeley is sturdier. He could play on if Trae Young were to guard him, you wouldn't give him the ball on the block, but he could go and create an advantage by being bigger. And he makes this intelligent, heady plays by getting to the paint and doing those things. So I actually think he's more plug and play and ready. I think he's a higher floor guy than as opposed to a high ceiling guy. But more and more teams are taking those type of players sooner in the draft because you need to hit on rookie contracts in order to build as deep and talented a roster to compete right now. So I think there's a real world. He's a lottery pick that is a contributor sooner rather than later.
All right, let's switch it up to another couple guys that aren't on the rundown. We got to talk about John Tonje, who had a magnificent performance. Yes, the age is possibly going to hold him back, but do you think there's a chance that he gets drafted?
I don't think he gets drafted, but I do think he is obviously summer league invite, possibly a two-way guy because he can shoot the ball. And, a guy that you can come in and on a playoff team or a team trying to contend for a playoff spot, and you need a roster spot of a guy who can understand his role and make shots, that's what you sign a Tonje for. So I don't necessarily think he gets drafted because, again, even with just the way things are, the second apron, there's going to be some draft and stash guys. There's guys who are not going to sign contracts just because of the money. But I think he is somebody that does eventually gets a look because he does the most important thing well for a role player or a projected role player in the NBA, which is shoot the ball.
I don't really like the way he plays, to be honest. He doesn't pass ever. And he tries to draw 1,000 fouls and he barrels into people. And I think it's something that doesn't translate that well in terms of the NBA is very open in spacing. And he's just trying to draw fouls and do things where he physically overwhelms people because he is older. I think when the physical strength advantage is minimized or just not there when he plays against the pros, I think his effectiveness loses some of the allure. He's very effective because he shoots 90% from the free throw line. He shoots 14 of those in the game the other day, maybe even more. And I think that he's a good shooter, no doubt about it. But I don't know if he's necessarily the type of guy who's a catch and shoot, plug and play, as opposed to someone who needs the ball in his hands to build a rhythm. And even when he does the catch and shoot, he always head fakes, catch and shoot, side steps. I think a lot of the stuff he does well is geared towards him being the man. And I don't think he's going to be the man in the NBA. So I'm a little lower on his prospects, especially considering there's less of that growth curve, considering he's 24 years old.
I actually think he is someone that can get drafted. I mean, I look at, maybe it's a team like Memphis at the very end of the second round that says, hey, you know what, we'll take another wing shooter, or a Denver or even the Lakers. I think one of those type of teams could have some interest in taking him, maybe even like the Clippers, just because he can come in and possibly be your 14th guy and provide some shooting, as opposed to spending your, a draft pick on a guy that's going to sit in the G League the whole time, and you're not really even going to get a chance to develop him because you're trying to win games. But the age is going to be a factor. Bennett Sturtz, he's the hot name right now. Draft Twitter on fire with his performance against Missouri. I mean, he's had a really good year. He's like the analytics darling. What do you think Bennett Sturtz should do? Return to school?
I think you should test the draft. Obviously, like your stock isn't going to get any higher than it is right now. Now, granted, you go back
except when he's an All-American at Iowa next year.
Yeah, you could go next year, but I mean, this year's draft, you got to think at the point guard spot. Let's say he has the opportunity to be a first-round pick this year in the late 20s, right? But next year, if he comes back and plays the same way, and again, it's in the Big Ten, like how often do guards come back to school and do the exact same thing? Granted, it'd be at a different level, obviously the Big Ten, and like you improve your draft stock. I think with the way things are now, like obviously Dylan Harper, obviously Fears, but I mean, he's 2 years older than Jakucionis. He's 2 years older than Yegor. Is he a better player than them now? Do they have more upside than him? I think is a legit question, even though he is 2 years older. But as far as like shooting the ball, controlling the team, making plays and pick and roll, I don't feel like their upside is too much greater than what he could become. And I feel like obviously you just have to test. Like you ended the season well, you beat an SEC team, and then you play well also against Texas Tech. But I just don't know what going back to school and playing at Iowa does for his draft stock next year. Is what
I agree. It's right now, I mean, the buzz is high. 21 points on 56, 55, 75 shooting splits over 2 games in the NCAA tournament with the win over Missouri and a loss to Texas Tech. The thing is that this dude doesn't come off the floor. He played every minute of the NCAA tournament. He played 40 minutes, and on the season, he averaged 39.3 minutes per game. I wonder, is that sustainable at Iowa next year? I think he's got a tough decision. I mean, he's got good size at 6'4", and like his draft stock is high. But then again, I look at totally different positions, but I look at Neek Clifford last year. I thought Neek should have came out. He comes back this year, and I think he's really helped his draft stock. I think he ends up going higher than he would have went if he stayed in last year's draft. And so with Bennett, I think it's a tough choice. Obviously, his coach is going to Iowa, and I'm sure the coach wants him to follow, and that means the NIL bag could be pretty hefty. But you definitely test. But I think he's a guy that if he tests, somebody may like him. Somebody may like him in the top 30.
But here's the thing about Neek, and I agree. I think Neek could have tested last year. His thing was, could he shoot? Obviously, he rebounds at a high level. Obviously, he's a good athlete, good passer. He's the ultimate role player. But I think he improved his stock because he shot 38% last year from three attempts. 3 attempts is a tricky number because it's like, that volume you would want it to be higher. But he came back this year and he shot 38% on 5 attempts per game. So, like,
honestly, though, that 38% was heavily padded from the last maybe 3 weeks of the season because he was around
this
35. Yeah, he was around 35 most of the year. And then if you look at his numbers just from like the last month or so, outside of the NCAA tournament, he didn't make a 3 in the 2 NCAA tournament games. But if you look at how he shot over the last month, it like really, really helped him get his numbers up.
Right. But to me, he had something, and it's a risk that, I feel like, especially with 3-point shooting, that once you got that reached that specific clip, you should absolutely go. And I don't feel like Sturtz's number would drop because he's a shooter, but I just think that with like Neek, it's helping him because he increases volume and maintain that same high percentage. Whereas Bennett Sturtz, if he comes back and he goes to, let's say he goes to Iowa, right, and he averages the same exact numbers, it's like, does that help him out? And let's say Iowa is still a bottom 4 or 5 team. And I mean, again, I understand that coach.
But Collum's unbelievable. They won't be bottom 4. So I think that coach is a genius, like an absolute wizard. So I feel pretty confident that he can get even more exposure. So, like, yeah, there's risk, like you outlined, and I don't disagree with it. But I think there's a world in which there is a bigger reward than, hey, he had an outing against Missouri that was impressive and he was okay against Texas Tech. Like, that's all anyone cares about. No one cares about the season because he didn't play against the big time schools. So I don't think that's necessarily right, but that's just kind of the perception I believe is held. So I think if he goes to Iowa and they're a top 5 team in the Big Ten, which I think is more likely than them being bottom dwellers, because this coach does nothing but win. Like, he is unbelievable. And in fact, I'll just say this: Indiana screwed up. They should have waited an extra day and waited for Drake to fall out and pick him up, because not only would that have made me look smart because I predicted it before the season, but more importantly, they could have gotten Bennett Sturtz, who's better than DeVries' son, and this coach is unbelievable. And then Indiana would be back. But my big point about Sturtz is he's really heady. Like, the guard he kind of reminds me of recent years is Ty Jerome. Plays at his own pace, shoots really well, unconventional score. Like, he shoots the floaters as opposed to getting all the way to the rack. He spits the ball out, and they play super slowly. So maybe that's what really makes me think of them, is they were the slowest pace in the country, more or less, and Virginia was like that. So I think they're pretty similar basketball players. He's a specialist in the pick and roll. Jerome was excellent in the pick and roll as well. I think there's a world in which he could do something similarly in terms of having a good showing, finding his way into the late first, early second round. But I also think there's a world that he gets $2 million plus in NIL, and he is an All-American and projects himself into the top 20.